Hello, welcome back to another episode of Beneath the Crust. Thank you for allowing Lily Bear to take you beneath the crust. Sundown. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. From time to time, I hear from those who I've been told are my leaders. I don't say they're my leaders, I'm told they're my leaders. I hear them saying how we as blacks are winning. It's usually followed with, we can drink from the same water fountain as white people. We get to sit in the front of the bus. Or they say something like, now black people are dating and marrying white people. We have more blacks in politics, and on and on. Sadly, nothing is ever said about black economics in this winning conversation. Well, if we are winning, we can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. We can't afford. We just can't. We can't afford to keep winning like this. Come on beneath the crust, if you dare. I'm going to start backward and I'm going to come forward. Land ownership, rural farmland. In 1910, blacks owned 15 million acres of farmland. By 1997, blacks only owned 2.7 million of farmland. The AELOS said, and I quote, blacks own less than 1% of all privately owned rural land today, 2016. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. We can't afford to keep winning like this. In 1920, 925,000 blacks owned farms. That's 14%. By 1975, just 45,000 blacks owned farms. That's less than 2%. Less than 2% of farmland. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. We can't afford to keep winning like this. In 2017, blacks own less than 8 million overall acres and less than 2 million farm acres. We can't afford many more of these kind of wins. We can't afford to keep winning like this. It has been said that the top 5 landowners in America, white men, just 5 now, own more land than all 42 million blacks in America combined. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. We can't afford to keep winning like this. 42 million blacks own about 0.33%. Notice I didn't say 33%, 0.33% of American land. Not 33%, 0.33%. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. We can't keep winning like this. Businesses. In 1900 to 1930, the phrase golden age of black entrepreneurship was coined by historian Juliet Walker. The most rapid growth increase of black entrepreneurship came in the early 20th century, where there were tens of thousands of black-owned businesses. Look at the numbers now. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. We just can't afford to keep winning like this. Blacks established the Black Belt on the south side of Chicago. By 1937, there were about 2,500 jobs on the south side of Chicago. Look at the south side of Chicago now. We can't afford many more of these kind of wins. We can't afford to keep winning like this. Blacks were in every aspect of business, the most prominent being newspaper, beauty, insurance, funeral parlors, and bankers. Black women owned their own beauty shops or worked out of other black women's beauty shops. Black men owned their own barbershops or worked out of other black men barbershops. Now, many blacks either rent a spot and set up business, or rent a booth in a non-black owned beauty or barber shop. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. We can't afford to keep winning like this. Blacks also owned restaurants, corner stores, nightclubs, grocery stores, and on and on. We owned almost all, if not all, of the businesses in our neighborhood. Look at the black business ownership in our neighborhoods now. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. I'm here to tell you, we can't afford to keep winning like this. Double duty dollars. From the early 1900s through the early 1960s, the term double duty dollars was used. This meant that any dollar spent with a business hiring blacks, and if blacks bought a product, it advanced the race. Blacks went out of their way to find and shop at black-owned businesses. They refused to, and I quote, fund our own subjugation by buying things from those who don't support us, unquote. This applied to things they could produce for themselves. This was called selected patronage. Look at us now. Many of us go out of our way to find non-black businesses to shop at. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. We can't afford to keep winning like this. Communities. Reconstruction was a time when black communities started to focus on more and more on their education. Blacks took the initiative and purchased land, constructed buildings, and raised money to hire teachers. By 1869, blacks outnumbered whites who were teaching black people in the South. Look at the ratio now. We can't afford many more of these kind of wins. We can't keep winning like this. We can't afford to. Blacks, along with the Freedmen's Bureau, established over 3,000 schools in the South. Many of the young men and women who were educated stayed on to educate others in the community. Look at the black flight from black communities. We can't afford many more of these kind of wins. We can't afford to keep winning like this. Religion. Churches in the black community served not only as a place to teach religion, but it addressed issues that affected the community. The church building served as a place for community meetings, centers, and schools. I tried to get 2 local churches here in Macon-Bibb County, Georgia, to partner with me one summer with their building to teach children over the summer. This lady had approached me. She'd seen me working with some kids, and they had daycares throughout Macon-Bibb County, Georgia. She had approached me and said that during the summer they have so many children, they need some place to put them. She was going to pay me so much per child, and then she was going to she was going to bring in her own teachers, their own food. All she needed was a place to house them. I didn't have that, so I tried to partner with a church. Then I went to another church. One said they couldn't do it for liability reasons. If the plight of our children is a liability, well, it actually is a liability, which is more reason why they should have worked with me. Because if the plight of our children isn't worth taking a chance for, I don't know what is. Didn't Jesus say, suffer the little children to come unto me? Actually, that's another podcast. The others said they had space, but they didn't want to partner with me and that I'd have to pay for the space. I explained to them that I had over 100 children, but I didn't have the money to rent a space, but I could pay them when I get my first payment from the place that was partnering with me over the summer. I told them what I would do is, once I buy the supplies and stuff, that I would split the money with the church, and also any increase in electricity, water, or anything like that, I would pay that as well. They said no. We can't afford many more of these kinds of wins. We can't afford to keep winning like this. At one time, the church provided shelter for visitors, political issues, and boys and girls learned how to be men and women. The church fought against racial injustice, and on and on. Look at what goes on in the churches now. We can't afford many more of these kind of wins. We can't afford to keep winning like this. I call this podcast Sundown because there was a song called Sundown. In it, the singer says, sometimes I think it's a sin when I think that I'm winning, but I'm losing again. In the 3-part series, I go into more details of these situations. I talk about how I feel we got into these situations, and I talk about how, well, I actually ask the question, how can we get out of these situations? I also invite the listeners to share with me on the second part to be considered to be featured on the third part. Thank you for allowing Lily Bear to take you beneath the crust. Keep on churning till the butter come. Albert C. Richardson, a black man, patent the butter churn, U.S. patent number 446470, February 17th, 1891. I'm Lily Bell. I'm just trying to create a dialogue. I'll leave you with this. If they close my book, you remember my story. Subscribe, like, share, comment, and oh yeah, stay tuned. A Nat Turner Runner production. Lock and load. Lily Bell. Be encouraged.